We're welcoming next David Blakesley. Dave is a Campbell Chair of Technical Communications and a professor of English at Clemson University. And as such, not someone that you would see every day at the conference. But he's also the CEO of Parlor Press and somebody deeply involved with technical communication. And he has a distinguished record in research and publication, and also, you know, from experience, because I have bought and read, has a beautiful book called Writing, a Manual for the Digital Age, which I recommend to everybody.
Oh.
With the floor, David Blakesley.
I'm surprised somebody has actually read that. Thank you, Paulo. It's great to be here, and Boris promised me that you would treat me well because I'm not. I consider myself a techie, but not on this level. I could participate in a conversation, but I couldn't show you much coding or that sort of thing, though I do some coding now and then. But it's a pleasure to be here, and really interesting for me to hear how people are using LaTeX to do some pretty amazing things. Okay, so let me share my screen and get going here. All righty, can you guys see that okay? Thumbs up?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. All righty, a few words about me, the least exciting part of the presentation, I promise. I'm the Campbell Chair in Technical Communication and Professor of English at Clemson University in South Carolina, USA. I also direct the PhD program here in Rhetorics, Communication, and Information Design. That's my day job. My night job is as the founder and publisher of Parlor Press, a scholarly publishing company I launched in 2002. So we're reaching our 20-year anniversary in about 2 weeks. Originally, Parlor Press was created to publish just one book, a collection of letters exchanged between Kenneth Burke and William Rookert, two people I've written about in my own scholarly endeavors. One thing led to another, and now we've published 350 books in a variety of formats, from print to multimedia ebooks. We have 18 book series running, most of them in the humanities. I'm the only employee. I do hire some freelance editors now and then to help because I don't particularly like copy editing, which is painful, and it's one of those things where the faster you go, the worse it gets. And I work with a bunch of series editors across the country who help me with development and acquisition of manuscripts. But I'm largely responsible for acquisition, production, design, distribution, and marketing. And then there's shipping, metadata, customer relations, author support, a Shopify website, accounting, which is a killer, and more. Most of these things are not activities I expected to be engaged in for the rest of my life. After I started a publishing company, I was focused on production. I knew how to make a book in Adobe InDesign. All the rest I've learned since then. It does sound a little bit impossible or unlikely that it would be sustainable, but we've gone for 20 years, and I've learned to be very efficient over time. We've had some success. One last year, one of our poetry titles was longlisted for the National Book Award. We've won a lot of other awards in the field for best book and so on. So it's been rewarding and challenging. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight. Let's see here. a little bit tonight about myself as both a writer and a publisher because they're related. And as I was thinking about what I would focus on, I was wondering who wins in the world of publishing, the base or the superstructure. I'm not a Marxist per se, but I've lived this struggle for some time as a writer and publisher. So tonight, I want to describe my efforts to change or adapt the democratized tools of production to produce new forms of writing, which ultimately led to an ongoing battle with the dominant cultures of production in the world of publishing. And that's really been the main struggle for me, is with the culture of publishing, which is very set in its ways, very resistant to change. I've managed to break through some of that with interesting results. I'm going to describe two brief case studies. One focuses on the writing and production of an innovative, if not disruptive textbook that Paulo mentioned, writing a manual for the digital age. It really is a beautiful book. And I'll tell you a little bit about how it was produced. The second tells the ongoing story of Parlor Press and just one particular issue related to production and distribution that I think is revealing and connects to possibly some of the work that you guys do. Okay, so I'm going to start with a few definitions of key terms that help me understand my academic and publishing existence with a couple of examples. And those terms I draw from Raymond Williams, the cultural critic. And the first term, the base. What do I mean by the base? Raymond Williams tells us the base is the real social existence of man. The base is the real relations of production corresponding to a stage of the development of material productive forces. The base is a mode of production at a particular stage of its development. Okay, so if you think of a base in publishing, what are the means of production? How are things manufactured in the book industry? They're manufactured in a lot of different ways with a lot of different tools. In my line of work on the publishing end, Microsoft Word is ever present, unfortunately. It's what the authors use to produce their work. I use Adobe InDesign and have for the last 20 years or so. Quark was a player for a while, but has largely disappeared. LaTeX is in this other world that really interests me, partly because it solves many of the problems and has long before they become issues in the mainstream dominant culture of production, with special characters and designing for different formats and that sort of thing. The superstructure, which is what contains or is the umbrella for the base, consists of the cultural and economic forces that both reflect and maintain the material base, the mode of production. The superstructure is of a secondary order and symbolic. This will all come together in a moment, I promise. Hegemony. Hegemony is the expression of power, an ideological force that dominates social, cultural, and economic life, and thus stabilizes the base, the modes of production. So here's an example of hegemony, I guess, visually. This is a CD-ROM ebook, slicing in half printed books. I like to use the phrase, the lingering hegemony of print. Print is always ever present in publishing, even if you're not designing and producing a print-based publication, the terminology, the practices and so on of print production go way back and haven't disappeared. They're always exerting some sort of force. Then Williams describes three cultures that interact and are ever present at any given moment. And those cultures are present in social networks like publishing. The dominant culture or the modes of incorporation are of great social significance, and incidentally, in our kind of society, have considerable economic significance. The educational institutions, as we all know, are usually the main agencies of the transmission of an effective dominant culture, and this is now a major economic as well as cultural activity. Indeed, it is both in the same moment. This dominant culture at the academic institution exerts itself on me all the time. People, know that I'm a writer and professor and teacher and that sort of thing. They don't know how on earth I function as a publisher at the same time. And I keep that basically a secret. I'm happy with them not knowing. Partly because, that means that the kind of hegemony that would exert itself on my activity as a publisher loses its power, and I can do what I need to do. Residual culture is persistent, a hanger-on, and in some cases never disappears. The status quo has great momentum, especially at universities. There's a residual culture that's always exerting its pressure. Most academics feel its effects daily, and especially if you try to change anything. The meanings and values which cannot be verified or cannot be expressed in the terms of the dominant culture are nevertheless lived and practiced on the basis of the residue, cultural as well as social, of some previous social formation. When you hear somebody say the way things used to be done or the way things were, they still exert their presence. Emergent culture is where I prefer to live. It is the future. Of course, you all probably have heard this before. The problem, said William Gibson, is that the future is already here, but it's just not evenly distributed yet. Much of my work as a writer and a publisher is meant to distribute the future, which sounds rather idealistic, I suppose, but it's what keeps me going late at night when I'm formatting thousands of footnotes and things like that. Emergent culture, new meanings and values, new practices, new significances and experiences are continually being created. But there is then a much earlier attempt to incorporate them just because they are part and yet not part of effective contemporary practice. One of the things I enjoy about being a entrepreneurial publisher is that I can incorporate new practices to see whether they work or not, many of them in the interest of making things more efficient. And I've had some success adapting various technologies for that purpose. This illustration is a nice one of the clash of emergent, residual, and dominant cultures. I'll let you get the joke there. Okay, case study 1, writing in the digital age. This first case focuses on my work as an author. I've written a textbook that has appeared in multiple editions. Their covers are shown here. They illustrate what, these covers illustrate what changed over a period of about 4 years of work. The one on the left, the Thompson Handbook, was created by the publisher with absolutely no consultation with the authors, and having little, if any, visual relationship with the content of the book. That's the way that it happens in a lot of textbook publishing. A different division of the publisher will produce the book. Marketing team might be responsible for producing the cover. Authors are not consulted, and whether the covers work with the books on the inside or not doesn't really matter. The cover is entirely a function of marketing. And unfortunately, it looks kind of ugly too. So we were stuck with that. And the second cover, the one on the right, I had a big hand in shaping. I was able to convince them over a period of time that it was important, given what the book does on the inside, which is argue for a close relationship between visual content and textual content, working together to create meaning, that the cover needed to reflect that sentiment also. And I even persuaded them to put a caption on the inside cover that goes like this: is a flower born digital? Makoto Murayama's are. Using his sketchpad, camera, microscope, and 3D rendering software, this artist joins technology with the craft of photography to help us see the natural world in a brand new way. And then here comes the marketing part. Can a writing handbook help students encounter the digital world in a brand new way? Only if it joins the art of writing with the technology for enhancing it. Blakesley and Hugovine's writing, finally, a rhetorical handbook for students born digital. That's a little bit over the top, but the idea is genuine. Okay, real quickly, I'm not going to explain this, but this is a typical page on the inside, a spread. You have a lot of visual content in the center of each page, or the inside parts of each page, and the main text runs in the margins, like a gloss or a commentary on the visual content. Typically in a textbook, the main text runs right down the middle of the page, and you have illustrations here and there, perhaps. But the idea is that it's a forward-looking exposition of information and ideas. And I wanted to break that mold because I don't think it's very effective at delivering information. However, when we have visual content and text working together, we might be able to communicate a little more meaningfully. So you can imagine the design challenges that this posed, just in terms of the complexity of the layout and the visual content and questions and text and all sorts of things working simultaneously. The first full edition came in at 1,300 pages produced, so all designed and typeset and everything. I can't imagine writing, designing, and producing that. It happened in a blur somehow over a period of years, but I managed to finish it with a lot of help from designers and development editors and so on. But one of the things I wanted to convey here is that it was critical for me to create or invent in the design space with the images and text in close proximity. So I knew how much space I had for text, how much space for visuals and that sort of thing. The idea being that the images and text converse with one another. As you know, Microsoft Word doesn't do well with images and text together. It's really poor, actually, and hasn't improved over the years really very much. So I composed much of the book in InDesign, This was CS2, which is about 15 years old at least. This was a screenshot of my workspace designing what was called a research spread, or an introduction to research in film studies. This one was. Once composed, I produced a PDF to share with the publishers so that the designers could see what I had in mind. And this is the dominant culture of publishing working. The next step, I had to retrofit the document so that I could share the content in a Word file, because that's how the publishers' book designers were prepared to receive new content. So I had to take the InDesign document that I had produced and copy all the text and then write instructions for where to place images and put it into a Word document and send them that. The 1,300-page book translated into a 7,000-page Word document, and I printed it out. It was about 3 feet tall, which I thought was actually funny. Okay, so that particular spread I was working on, here's what the finished version looked like in the first edition. It was pretty nice. The designers were great at taking my ideas, and you know, they were professionals in layout and design, and could put it all together nicely. Now, this was extremely complex process. It was new for them. I persuaded Cengage, who bought Thomson at some point, when we started on the second edition, to work entirely in the design space. So they employed InCopy, which is like an InDesign collaborative shared workspace. They did not agree overnight. It took them about a year to agree. And then everybody had to be trained in how to use InCopy. And as authors, we were able to go in and change text on the fly of the design document. Prior to that, the dominant and residual cultures of textbook publishing kept authors a long way from the means of production. This new workflow changed that. Unfortunately, and I'm positive this wasn't a precipitating cause, but within a couple of years after the second edition appeared, the dominant culture of textbook publishing changed dramatically, mostly due to economic forces in the superstructure. Students stopped buying new textbooks, opting for rentals or nothing. Textbook companies are largely now content managers and distributors, with authors relegated to the margin, working on modules that could be redistributed across platforms, content being reused and repurposed all the time. The textbook companies make their money with ancillaries and technical support, content management systems, that sort of thing. The base, where authors had a vital role in the means of production or invention, gives way to the superstructural forces of data management. So that's the story from the world of writing and publishing, from the writer's point of view. Okay, case study number 2. This is a representation of some of the stages in the publishing life cycle. This is from a publisher's perspective. At different moments in the emergence of publishing, the power of different stages over the others rises and falls. So, for example, marketing could dictate a lot of the activities in the other stages, or production, or design, or distribution, or invention, or where the author is working, could rise to the top and exert the most power over how things are done. In scholarly publishing around the turn of the 21st century, marketing and marketability started to compromise the whole process. It really started to take over. And that was a response to an economic problem. Libraries stopped buying books in the quantities that they had used to. So that almost overnight, a a scholarly press who could count on maybe 1,000 copies of a scholarly monograph selling, saw the numbers drop to about 100. So a 900% decrease in sales. And so university presses, scholarly presses were severely constricted on how adventurous they could be with authors, about taking chances with authors, and eventually it got to the point where authors had to be well known and pretty famous before they could get a book accepted. Writing about popular and timely topics in books that would sell to more than just libraries, but to readers, and were affordable to readers. Outside peer review took a back seat to evaluations by the marketing team. Those were some of the changes that had been occurring that moved me to get into publishing as a scholarly publisher. I was not happy about marketing people telling us what scholarly value our work had. Now, with the emergence of new formats over time, like EPUB and Mobi, the stress on production processes increased. You know, you've heard about the democratization of production and the idea that you could be producing things on a desktop that were high quality publishing documents. But that meant that the desire for efficiency and producing more started to compromise production values. Amazon's Kindle promised to make books much cheaper to read almost overnight, but the means of production couldn't keep up. Take this example of the first publication of Allen Ginsberg's Howl on the Kindle, which Amazon touted with much fanfare. However, the Kindle format, Mobi, which is an oversimplified or simplified and proprietary version that tries to do what EPUB does, could not easily handle line spacing, line breaks, or stanza breaks. Some expertise in the conversion of print to EPUB or Mobi was suddenly required, but didn't exist yet. And so you had the first publication of Ginsberg's Howl on the Kindle messing up all the line breaks, stanzas, line spacing, and so on. And you see some of the images there. On the right, far upper right, is the Kindle version as it first appeared. And you lose the line breaks. And for a poet, the line breaks are critical. So there was a big stink about this on social media. Publishers Weekly even criticized Amazon for publishing a book the way they did. This is one statement by a reviewer. Why is it that publishing sits so far outside the norms of what is required to launch something digital? More statements by people on social media complaining that the publishers were being lazy. They should have been able to fix it easily. Other people saying this is really difficult, can't be done. People arguing about whether it's important or not, where line breaks, etc., etc. Okay, so Parlor Press comes into this situation. We published a lot of poetry, more than 70 titles so far. This is just a few screenshots of some of the recent ones. None of them were available in EPUB or Kindle format. They were all produced for print. Could be converted to PDF very easily. But I wanted to make them available on a Kindle, as well as our entire backlist, 350 titles. I could pay for somebody to convert them, but at $200 or more a pop for the conversion, and have it be a bad conversion, we're talking about $70,000, maybe $100,000 And Parlor Press's budget is coming out of my day salary, and that was just not going to happen. I tend to be a DIY person, so I figured out how to do it myself, and then set about converting everything to EPUB. Of course, I did look at LaTeX as a solution. I'm still excited about it, but boy, is it complicated and daunting. This is an illustration of some of the processes involved that people have written about, and I'm sure you guys have read all of this stuff. Just the process of moving from content to PDF, MOBI, EPUB, HTML, and so on. It was pretty unlikely that I was not going to deploy that for 350 books. It would take me 10 years to do that. So I had to come up with another solution. This is Michael Hartle just talking about his process of doing it for his softcover book. He concludes after outlining the process, easy, right? In fact, no, it was excruciating and required excessive amounts of profanity to achieve, but it's done, so ha. Okay, so from a publisher's point of view, one thing I wanted to do, I've wanted to do this since the beginning, but the technology and the talent just wasn't there yet, is to be able to produce a single source content for production and in production that could be distributed across multiple formats, print, PDF, EPUB. I don't have to worry about MOBI anymore because that's disappeared. Amazon will convert to EPUB now. But the idea is I want to produce a single document in Adobe InDesign and have it be fairly easy to generate the PDF and the EPUB rather than having to go back and translate it into EPUB. I want to be producing it as an EPUB and print version simultaneously. And that's actually not hard to do now. It starts to turn the tables from a focus on production driving the creation process for the author, and starts to exert some pressure from the distribution angle on the author to do things a little bit differently. And I want writers to be aware of the future of their content so that they can plan ahead for it. That was one thing I learned from doing a textbook myself. It changed my authorship. And now one of my challenges is to teach authors how to do some of this themselves. And the lines of influence on various stages on the author start to change. Distribution, for example, can start to exert pressure, not undue pressure, but it's good kind of pressure on how people compose things. It's not helpful for authors to just indiscriminately use Microsoft Word to format and design their documents, because much of the work that they do there has to be undone. Poets especially need to understand how and why distribution changes their art. If we want to distribute to EPUB and Amazon and online booksellers, we need to change. This is just a small example of how dominant culture exerts its pressure on practice. And you guys all have experience with this, I know. The hegemony of spaces, tabs, and hard returns preserves the status quo of production as governed by residual and dominant cultures, and embedded not just in software, but in the socialized practices of the people. And who would have thought this? The non-breaking space and soft return are the elements of the emergent culture. That's going to start the revolution. Isn't that amazing? I'm kind of joking, but maybe not. Word processors and even keyboards encourage people to use spaces, tabs, and returns for line and paragraph spacing, regardless of the target format. Those of you who have converted, and I've done a lot of this, converted Word documents to HTML and web pages and so on, know that it's a pain to have to do that conversion. Word used to try to have an automatic HTML converter, but that was a disaster. What I do now is quite simple. I have an author's guide. I give them directions, especially for poets, about how to display formatting marks in Word. I ask them to single space. I tell them to never use a tab for anything. If they want a line break, like an extra space between stanzas, they have to use a soft return, and I give them the keystroke command for that. If they have a poem boundary, they have to use a manual page break. If they need to move characters along a line, I tell them they need to use a non-breaking space and how to use that. They hate me at first, but they love me later, because what it means is that their books end up looking the way they want them to. And poets are especially concerned about that. So tab spaces and hard returns go in the trash can, multiple hard returns. Distribution starts to change invention. And what I have here are some screenshots of what the difference is. The author version in Word on the far left, that's the way it originally was. The middle version used to be the print-focused production image of the layout for a book of poetry here. So you can see the little dots or spaces, and you have the hard returns between stanzas. And then the one on the far right is what it starts to look like when we're producing it for both print and EPUB. And you see those non-breaking spaces are those little carrot-shaped icons. And then the soft returns are the little angled bracket. And now, when I have authors submit using non-breaking spaces and soft returns to help with formatting, it's quite easy for me to bring it into InDesign and produce from the same document the version on the left, which is PDF or print, and the version on the right, which is how it looks in an ebook reader. And I have to do, takes me about 10 minutes after I finish the print edition of a book to produce a bookmarked accessible PDF. And it takes me about 5 minutes to produce a high quality EPUB version that gets into the distribution stream automatically and very quickly, and doesn't take 4 hours or 5 hours of conversion anymore. So when a new book gets produced, it's in multiple formats all at once, which I know you know is important. Converting the old books just for the 70 poetry books took about 4 hours per book, which is pretty fast. But when you scale up to 70 books, you have 280 hours of work. That's 7 weeks. How many weeks is that? I don't know how many weeks it is. It's a lot. 7 weeks, 4 times 7. 7 weeks of work just converting the poetry books, and we had 350. So I trained my son to do it. He's an expert now. I pay him pretty handsomely. And that's now reduced to 10 minutes or less of production time. I'm going to close now with this. As you imagine, the work required to convert a backlist designed for print is substantial, particularly for a publisher like Parlor Press, which runs on a shoestring budget with no full-time employees. The democratization of production and digital printing technologies that made desktop publishing possible have led to new challenges at new stages of the publishing cycle. The distribution cycle in particular, because so many distribution channels that accept ebooks have very particular requirements. For the near future of publishing, the residual and dominant cultures of production must be reimagined in light of the emergent culture of distribution. Once that happens, the process of single source development for multiple formats will be free and easy. And that's an end for now. Thank you. Okay, I need to stop my share. Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Very entertaining lecture.
Yes.
Learning a lot.
Do you have time for questions?
Yes, we do. We coming up on a break, so we have all the time we can use.
It was a perfect presentation, and all questions have been answered.
I have, okay, it's a hated thing, the most hated thing after a presentation, but I have not a question, but a comment. And comment is that we really, in the tech world, really need to think about ebooks and producing ebooks. It's the second, just in the first half a day, we have a second talk about production of ebooks and how we need to do it right. And we do have a lot of interesting work here. I really like that Tech for ebook package and Tech for HT line. And what we need to give to people around is a very simple and very user-friendly way to just with a press of a button getting EPUB thing. And after we get EPUB, PenDoc can do the magic and do all other formats. But I don't think that PenDoc can do LaTeX to EPUB, real LaTeX to EPUB conversion, because as we all know, the only program that can read TeX is TeX.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we need to do a TeX tool which would take TeX input and create a good EPUB.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And
Well, you know, another thing that's been happening, and we've seen this in the news on all other fronts, but the supply chain interruptions that we saw with the pandemic are not just pandemic caused, but we're using natural resources to produce books, and publishers and printers are having paper supply issues, long delays in publishing processes, and the expense of printing books has almost doubled in the last 5 years. And that's been happening at the same time, even though Parlor Press is fairly new to having all of its books in all the formats. Last month, our revenue was 55% ebooks, 45% print. And that's just going to continue to go up. You know, they said that was going to happen 20 years ago, but it's kind of taken this long for it to manifest itself. And mostly that's been people catching up with the, readers catching up with the technology. They're a lot more comfortable reading on their phones and tablets than they used to be. And the smell of used books is not as appealing as it used to be. I have hundreds and hundreds of paper books in my house. I don't use them anymore because I can't find anything. I prefer to, there we go. I've got about 50 of those, Boris. Oh, there we go. There, now I'm
Yeah,
impressed.
I don't
But
have 50,
I convert
have
everything
20.
to digital. So
Yeah.
I can find it immediately and I can take notes on it and I can find them again. And I'm not slowed down by hunting through books on a bookshelf. So
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I'd be happy if anybody has questions later, feel free to email me. I'll make my presentation available to the organizers so it can go online, and you can always find me at parlorpress.com. Check it out. There are a lot of great books there. We publish the kind of standard definitive edition of Mort to Arthur now. So King Arthur's Tales, translated into more modern English by the expert on that sort of thing. We published that book, and Robin Hood's Tales, the kind of standard edition of that, and all sorts of things.
I really would like to buy this, preferably in PDF version.
Oh yes, you could go and get it in 5 minutes and be reading it during the break.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very, very much.